I was born in Potter Valley, California. Potter Valley, California is north of San Francisco, about 2.5 hours. So there was a post office, two little churches, sometimes one, sometimes two, and a little bitty store. That's it. There were lots of properties in the mountains that people owned from the city, and they were like hunting cabins, lots of hunting cabins there. And so my dad was kind of the caretaker for a hunting cabin, and so we had a trailer on their land, basically. I was the youngest of nine that I knew about. I had a room which I think was really supposed to be a closet. A bed didn't fit in it. I slept on a cot. My dad, uh, well, he was an alcoholic. There were times where he'd like try really hard and he'd stop drinking, but that was almost harder for us because then he was mean. He would do crazy things, like they'd come home from the bar in the middle of the night and I had really long hair, and he'd pick me up by my feet and put my head in the toilet and flush my hair down the toilet and laugh. Or he got my sisters and I out of bed and he'd take us out to the creek and he'd say, "You're gonna learn to swim. We're gonna have a family swim," or whatever. We're in our pajamas in the middle of the night in this freezing cold creek. And my mother, I think when I was really young, she was healthier, but by the time I really remember her, she was mentally ill, and I don't know what was wrong with her. I do remember like coming home from school and we would find her sitting on the bed with a gun in her hand and her just saying, I can't do this anymore. So I didn't view her like I think you would view a normal mother. My sister used to say I had a chip on my shoulder. I think I was smart enough to know that something wasn't right, but at the same time, maybe I was naive and I didn't quite know what wasn't right. I just knew I was unhappy. So I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But part of that unhappiness was also being fearful because you don't know what you're coming home to. And it was normal but stressful at the same time. And they were both sick. So, we were at the hospital with her a lot. We were at the hospital with my dad a lot. He had a heart attack. He had a couple strokes. I mean, my sister and I knew how to call 911. I mean, so it was a lot of stress and feeling the responsibility kind of for them a little bit. I struggled in school. My parents had me in remedial classes because I think that nobody understood back then that environment plays such a big factor in how well you can do academically. And so I actually was convinced I was mentally retarded. If you tell a child from the time he's born that he's green, by the time he can look in the mirror and see that he's not, you can't convince him otherwise. I would lay in bed and worry about the craziest things. Like, I was sure I couldn't learn. And so I would worry about how do you know how to pay your bills? Like, what am I going to do if I'm not smart enough to know how to pay my bill? We had our electricity shut off a few times because couldn't pay the bills, I guess. And I would think about that. I would lay in bed and think, okay, I don't think I can learn how to run a cash register. I don't think I'm smart enough for that. I don't think I would think about all the things I might be able to do. And I thought, well, I might be able to work with kids, but I don't think that pays very well. And I don't think I can finish college, so I couldn't be a teacher. But how am I going to know how to pay the light bill? How do you know about things like that? And for some reason, I didn't feel like I could ask my parents questions like that. I didn't ask them questions. I just secretly worried about stuff like that. And I would pray. I would pray to get out of that. I would pray to get out of there somehow, but I didn't daydream, which is, I don't know. Maybe it was too scary because I couldn't face it if it didn't come true. I don't know. The superintendent of the school had apparently contacted CPS and had been in communication with them. And if I understand it correctly, they were going to talk to my parents about that we were not being cared for properly. And so my parents talked to the superintendent, and they basically said, no, we're not interested. But somehow that must have, I'm just guessing, that must have been a relief to my mother. I think she really did care. She just couldn't. She just could not parent me. And I think she was probably relieved to think, okay, there really are people that are going to look after my kids if I can't do this. So I don't know how old I was. I was probably middle school, I'm thinking. And she had tried before to commit suicide and was not successful. And so she realized, oh, I'm diabetic. I just quit taking my insulin and I eat whatever I want. So she said to me one night, we went on a camping trip, and she said while we were on that trip, I just want you to know if anything ever happens to me that God will take care of you. She stopped taking her insulin, and she got like a whole bunch of junk food, and she just ate all this sugar. We woke up to the sound of her basically drowning. She was having a heart attack, I think. And so we were in a camping trailer of all the dumb things. So we had to get out and run and call 911. And so they came, took her to the hospital. And since we were camping, we weren't in our hometown. So it took a while for the sisters and the relatives to get there. And when they took the family back into the room, I'm assuming that's when they were going to pronounce her dead. You know, I sort of knew that, and I refused to go. Even at that young age, I just thought, I'm not up for this. I cannot do this. So I just said, I'm not going. And I sat in the waiting room by myself. So what ended up happening was they did pronounce her dead. And this was absolutely not intentional. It was completely chaotic at that moment. But as a result of my not going in there after they pronounced her dead and dealt with all the paperwork or whatever, everyone left and forgot me because I wasn't in the room with them. So they didn't realize, nobody, you know, it's chaotic and there's a lot of people. And so they left me there, and we're not in our hometown. So finally, after forever, this nurse comes into me and says, oh my goodness, I think your family left you. The pastor of the little community church got in touch with my father. Either my dad called them and said she's died or whatever. I don't really know. But they had the conversation with him again about, okay, now Child Protective Services is going to step in. What do you want to do? We're willing to help you here. So then he said, okay, you can step in and help her as a community. So this superintendent of the school talked to the people in this little church and said, how do we help this family? Because in their wisdom, this was brilliant, they understood enough about my personality and enough about the fact that I had grown up in this little, small, intimate community to take me out of that would have been detrimental to me. And if CPS would have taken me out, I probably would have been taken to another town where they would find a foster home for me. So I don't even know how that all worked, but at any rate, somehow my dad agreed to it, and different people said, okay, we're going to be a part of this however we can. And so there was one main lady, her name was Myrtle, and she said that I would live with her the majority of the time. And then there were a few other families as well that said, we'll help when we can or however we can. There was no adoption. There was no paperwork. There was no foster care. We forged my dad's signature on anything I needed. And so one afternoon, the lady I stayed with most of the time, Myrtle, my dad took me to her house. And again, this was a game changer. He took me to her house, and I think he was early. She wasn't home. And that was not her poor planning. I think he just got me there early or whatever. And I know it was hard for him to just hand me over like that. So he just didn't wait for her. He just left me there. There I am with my suitcases on her porch by myself, and he drives away. And so again, I had that just feeling like, okay, there is a God, and this is what this is going to look like for me. And this is uncomfortable, but I trust this. I just know that right now, all those years of praying to get out of this mess, I just got out. And I don't know what this is going to look like now, but this is where I am today. And so that's how I ended up out of the trailer. Sometimes I would stay with our pastor and his family. And then there was another family, the Richardsons, they had an adjoining ranch to Myrtle's. And so I stayed there a lot, actually. There was another lady that I would stay with her. Sometimes she also had a farm. Myrtle was the person that I lived with the most of the time, the kind of the main lady. Anyhow, when I first moved in with her, it was clear I had some emotional problems, and she was not sure what to do about that. It wasn't like there were counselors available out there. I mean, maybe, but at any rate, she just felt like I didn't sleep well at night. I just was struggling. And so she was discussing that with the pastor and the other people. I'm sure they were praying about that, about how to help me. But this was brilliant. And she made this decision, and I felt like this was one of those times when you realize, oh wow, that was really a thoughtful thing that she did for me, and I understood it, even at that young age. But she decided she didn't know how to help me, but she said, I don't know how to help her, but I know who does know how to help her, and this is what we're going to do. So she decided to make these cassette tapes of her praying and reading the Bible. And since I had the most trouble at night, she, back, remember in the day when people were all into like subliminal messages? And she said, I don't know if this works or not, but we're going to try this. And so when I would go to bed, she would put these tapes on playing quietly, so I could barely hear it, but it was scripture and her praying over me. And so I would sleep at night with God's word being read over me, and her praying things like, you are lovable and you deserve to be loved, and we love you. Isn't that crazy that someone would do that? And that was really touching to me, that she would think of that and go to the trouble to do that for me. It was so comforting. Isn't that neat? I went from job to job, worked in a group home. That was actually a pretty good job because it paid okay, but I knew I wouldn't do that forever. And kind of wandered like that for a long time. Just one little cheap apartment here, little job there, barely getting by. And finally I realized, okay, this is where I think God's not going to rescue me. And that's when I started to realize, okay, maybe what he really wants me to do is to learn how to overcome. I felt like a failure my entire life. And I thought, how do you get over that? How do you get over feeling like you can't do anything? You got to do something. It's successes, right? That you build on. And I thought maybe that's what he really wants from me. Maybe what he really wants is for me to learn how to overcome. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna go to nursing school, and I am gonna either fail doing nothing or I'm gonna fail trying. So then I started to get some insight to maybe I had some ability that I didn't know about. And I think obviously I'd had that before, but if you don't know it, you don't know it, right? If you think you're green, right? So that was probably when I started to realize, you know what? He didn't cheat me. I do have some talents and some gifts. I just got to figure out what they are. I got married, have an awesome husband and 2 wonderful kids, and every Christmas is mine. And I love it. But the real happy ending is finding myself before I got that. That's not what made me whole. What made me whole was, that was like the icing on the cake. What made me whole was getting those little successes and checking off my bucket list and realizing God was so faithful to me and letting me overcome, letting me have those little victories and letting me find my strength and find who I was. And there were great people coming in and out of my life all the time. I had to see it from a different perspective. I didn't realize that he had been that involved. It had all been without my knowing. He was just this loving man that recognized that we were in trouble and said, we're going to do something about this because we can. I want to apologize to my parents, actually. I would love to say to them, you know what, I harshly judged you. I really think they did make some bad parenting decisions, really. But I think when I was younger, I held them to a standard that no one could keep, I think. And I just would love to say, I'm sorry for having expectations of you that weren't fair, maybe. And and also just, I want to say to him, okay, I do get it. I think you did love me. When I was really, really young, there was a pastor at the little church. His name was Pastor Haskell. I can't remember his first name. Anyhow, he was one of those people that I watched and I wanted to be like him. He was just one of the kindest souls. You knew that his faith was real and that he loved God and he loved people and he meant it. Absolutely meant it. You could just tell. And he was always so kind to me. I was this little chubby, dirty kid, and he always had this little sweet, he called me Goldilocks, and always had this big smile, where other people might be offended by our smell, or, you know what I'm saying? He loved the unlovely, and I loved that about him. And one time, I was sick. I don't know what was wrong with me, but I was in the hospital for a few days, and so my parents just left me. They didn't stay. And he came in and sat at the night in a rocking chair and stayed with me. Isn't that amazing? And I got to find him, and I got to contact him and talk to him, and I just said, thank you. I never forgot it. I never forgot that you called me Goldilocks and you loved me when I was unlovely, and you stayed with me in the hospital when I was scared.